This video is to answer some of the questions that I've gotten from previous videos. We'll start with, why do you cut so low to the ground? And the videos that I'm showing are just some of the trees that I've cut since I've started taking some of the videos. I'll show you some samples. The primary reason why I cut so low to the ground when I do, which I don't always, is value, or just straight up money. This is a cherry tree, fairly good size. This bottom log would be considered a prime or a prime plus log. The amount of money that I get if I sell this log versus cutting it for myself is about $1,000 per thousand, or 1,100 if it's a prime plus. The last pricing that I got, if it's a prime plus, it was $1,100 per thousand. For just a straight prime, it's $1,000 per thousand. If this was a maple, prime plus is $1,750 per thousand. Straight prime is $1,550, and even just a select is $1,350. So this log, if cut at about 10 foot long for the butt log, calculates at about 200, a little over 200 board foot by the Doyle scale for a 10-foot log. That means that each foot of the log is about 20 board foot. So if I cut this 2 to 2.5 foot above the ground, which a number of people have told me I should be doing, I would be leaving 1.5 feet on the stump. 1.5 feet translates to about $30 to $52 for a cherry or a maple log. That would be even more if this were a veneer quality log. I say I'm leaving 1.5 feet. Basically, that is the extra that they're saying. If you go 2 foot above ground level, I figure I'm cutting about 6 inches above ground level. So 6 inches from 2 foot leaves 1.5 feet. So there would be 1.5 feet extra wood left on the stump. I believe it's worth the extra effort that it takes cutting it that low for that kind of money. It adds up after you've cut a bunch of trees in a day. Now, I am not a professional, so please take whatever I say with a grain of salt, and pretty much anything you see on YouTube with a grain of salt. I always recommend getting professional training if you're want to do something that is as dangerous as cutting trees down. I've been doing it for a long time, but I still don't know everything. I'm still learning. My videos are for entertainment. They're not how-to. They're basically just how I do things. If you want to watch someone that I think really knows what they're doing when cutting northeastern hardwoods, look up Nuts 319. I've been watching his videos for quite a while, and he seems to really have a good handle. He's a professional, and looks like he really knows what he's doing. I also watch Buck and Billy Ray, but he is more of a western, large conifer cutter, and that most of his videos are dealing with cutting yard trees, not trees in the woods. Most of the trees I cut, I don't cut this low. I only do this for the higher value trees. There's a few instances where I won't cut this low. It's just not worth it. One, if it's a low value tree, It's not worth the time and effort that it takes to cut it on the lower side. If it's firewood tree, if it's got problems with the butt log, if there's rot in it or something on that order, make it easy on yourself. Yeah, cut it to 2.5 foot high. No issue with doing that. I've been asked, why would you fall a tree into another tree? And this is a perfect example. I purposely fell this into a half-rotted beech tree. Now it hung up longer than I thought. It took about 30 seconds for it to actually take that beech tree down, but it did, and that's much safer than trying to cut the beech tree, with it the top half dead and that when you're drop a tree into it from 40 foot away. There'll be another example of dropping a tree, an example of when to drop one tree into another. Now this one's a large aspen, and you can see that we cut this probably 2 foot or close to that above ground level, maybe even 2.5 foot. This is my son cutting the tree. This is a good sized tree, but here's an example. The aspen is not worth all that much. So, cut it where we're comfortable cutting it. One of the other questions I've been asked a lot is, why do I cut my notches so small? This one's actually my son cutting a tree, but I don't consider my notches small. The main purpose for the notch is to establish the hinge. As long as you get enough hinge wood to direct the tree to exactly where you want it to fall, and you're doing plunge cutting, there's no reason to have a really big notch. You're actually wasting some wood sometimes. In this situation, he's doing a Humboldt cut, which does not waste wood. And this is a beech, so we're cutting it up a little bit higher. But having a really deep notch with plunge cutting is kind of superfluous. I do try to have the hinge at the 80% or better mark when I'm cutting trees. But no need to go, halfway into the tree or even a third of the way into the tree, if you're doing the plunge cutting and there's not other extenuating circumstances. If you've got a tree with a heavy lean, especially a side lean, then yes, you're going to need a deeper notch and a little more holding wood in your hinge to control the direction of the fall. But most of the time it's not necessary. You got to play it with the way the tree is. I almost always use a plunge cut with larger trees. It's the safest way to go. It might take just a little bit more time, and it's a little bit more skilled. I certainly wouldn't recommend doing that with a big tree with someone who is just starting to cut trees down. Now, in the last video I posted, my son decided that he was going to do just a straight cut, and ended up, that was a mistake, especially since the saw was a little bit on the dull side as well. So I, recommend to learn how to do that and use it most of the time if you're cutting trees that are big enough to use it with. Smaller trees, I almost always just do the face cut, back cut. Now, this is a situation where we're cutting 3 dead cherries that are kind of in a group. Normally, if this was a maple, a beech, almost anything else in the woods, I wouldn't cut this. But cherry is pretty rot resistant, so we did cut it. But here's another example of falling one tree into another to clear it. In this situation, it got hung up actually accidentally, uh, but it cleared it, knocked it down, and that worked pretty good. And this is also a situation where we're cutting, a couple of foot up off the ground. Now, no mill would buy these logs, uh, but I can cut them on my sawmill and end up with perfectly good cherry. All of the sapwood is rotted, but the core of these trees is very sound, and you'll probably be able to see that, with the butt sections after they've come down. Never walk under a hung up tree, and in general, you should give it a couple of minutes before you even get near it, because they can just come down on their own, kind of like that cherry that I showed just a little earlier. It came down about 30 seconds after it got hung up. So, just you got to be careful. Now, whenever working around dead trees, be very careful. I didn't show this, but before we ever started working on these trees, we put a chain around up fairly high, and I yanked on it with the tractor, each one of these three trees a number of times to see if I could snag anything loose. And I was always looking up. We have communication in our helmets so that we can actually talk to each other even when the chainsaw is running full blast. And so I could warn him. And he was also looking up on a somewhat regular basis. But always safety first. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free. Let me know. Put them in the comment sections. I read every comment that I get.